Our Yandex, Russia's search giant, raised $1.3 billion in an IPO this week. Now, that's the biggest tech offering of the year. Now, that success suddenly has investors and technologists alike focused on technology in Russia. Now, Mattias Westman's Prosperity Capital, Prosperity Capital, at 44% in the last year. The Bloomberg statistics called the second best performing fund ever. This is your company. You're fluent in Russian. What is going on in Russia in terms of technology that has investors so excited all of a sudden?
Well, I think one thing to understand is a lot of Russians are very good mathematicians and engineers. And now they have an opportunity to create the companies they could have done for a long time. We see a lot of really successful companies. Yandex, of course, has taken a 65% market share in the Russian market now, and is gaining on Google in several other markets close to Russia also.
What is it about that market? Because we've talked about this week a lot, that Google has gone into a lot of other markets in a lot of other languages and dominated those markets. That hasn't happened in Russia. Why?
Well, I think Yandex is one of the few companies probably that has at least as good technology as Google does.
Really?
And then, of course, the local knowledge gives them the edge.
Well, how so?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of local content that they, having 2,500 engineers on the ground, can contribute to their site, which maybe Google has difficulty doing. And I think generally the Yandex algorithms are as good as Google's. And as you know, maybe the Russians were always very good at database handling, partly because they had so poor computer power before.
What do you mean?
Well, they had very limited access to strong computers for a long period of time. Right. So enormous amount of focus was put on getting very efficient use of that computer power they had.
So in other words, when your computer stinks, your software's got to be better.
Yeah, obviously.
And they had crummy computers, and so they had better software in the history of that.
And they focused a lot on getting it as good as they could.
Very interesting. So when you look for investments in Russia, and I know you look across all fields, but particularly in the world of technology, where do you think the opportunities are in Russia?
Well, I think there are a lot of companies who are doing a lot to become more modern. They were all, you can say, Soviet production units when they were privatized. But now new entrepreneurs, new management teams come in and turn them into modern companies, and that creates a lot of value. Obviously, a modern company is worth quite a lot more than the Soviet ministry.
Is it something about the world's change has sort of caught up to where there's a real fulcrum point where the slow evolution of technology over the last 30 or 40 years outside of the Soviet Union is now the instant introduction in Russia?
Yeah, I think in Russia and in emerging markets as a whole, we've seen an explosion in productivity because of the introduction of new technologies, globalization of these technologies. Now they can do what they previously couldn't do. Russia is one of those exponents, but the same case can be made for China and other emerging markets.
All right, so let's drill down a little more. Like, what kind of investment specifically are you looking at? Feel free to name one if there's something that sort of is doing what you want it to do.
Yeah, I mean, you have several companies. You have old-style Soviet oil companies transforming themselves into, state-of-the-art technology and much better field management. You have food retailers.
So let's talk about that. Field management in an oil business is when you've got a series of wells that are spaced in a certain degree. Some are producing wells, some aren't. You don't really know which ones are producing wells, so you don't put your resources in the right place. A lot of that's through software and semiconductors and valve control from a distance. That's all happening for the first time there?
Absolutely. I mean, they're getting the new technology in, all 3D, of course they're using technology.
Again, 3D seismic in the oil and gas field is where you lay cables over it and you create a 3D image of what's underground. It's kind of not that new in the rest of the oil and gas business. No. That's new to Russia.
Yeah, and so they have real field imaging technology, so you can see where the oil is, so you can make it flow in the right direction and so on. The Soviets just punched holes in the ground and hoped for the best. That's one thing. Then, of course, the whole retail sector is being transformed. Again, small shops without any real logistics. Now you have organizations like Magnit. Probably they will open 1,000 stores this year. 40 or 50 hypermarkets. Probably nobody has done that ever in the world. They need to have absolute control of where all their stuff is on the road.
Why are these Russian companies and not global companies that are going into Russia with their technologies? What is it about that market that's open enough to allow for innovation and closed enough to keep the innovation local?
Well, I think that there's, of course, there are a lot of young, strong entrepreneurs who want to become really modern and profitable companies. It is, however, quite open, so there's quite a lot of foreign competition in food retailing. 2 out of the top 5 are foreigners. There are, I think, 4 out of the top 10 banks are foreign banks also. So it's a pretty open economy. but for the most part, the Russian companies can hold their own.
I'm curious also a lot about risk. You know, there's been a lot in the news in the last few weeks. We've been reporting a lot about this situation in China. I know, a different country, different place in the world. But this Alipay situation where Alipay was taken away from Yahoo and put under the CEO's personal control. There's been a history of that in the Russian oil business and so on, where U.S. investors have gotten essentially kicked out and gotten their money taken away. What are the risks of investing in Russia for funds like yours?
Well, I think people tend to focus a lot on the political risks, which I think are overstated. In general, they don't take things away from you. The problems we have faced...
in general, you don't worry about it.
No, but okay, very, very rarely.
It's a big deal.
Very, very rarely this happens, mainly really in one case.
Right.
But what we have had to worry about over all these 15 years that our fund has been operating is more corporate governance problems. You know, these are unformed companies, a lot of moving parts, and from time to time, not everybody has the best interests of minority shareholders at heart.
Right.
And we need to, you know, as shareholders, be quite active to try to minimize those risks. And that's one of the reasons we've been able to outperform, that we have managed this process quite well.
Well, I want to find out how you do that. I also want to know about the accounting. I mean, is the accounting in Russia, in these Russian companies, as crummy as bad corporate governance would dictate? That is, the numbers aren't real.
No, I don't think that's been one of the smallest problems we've faced. I mean, we've had other types of problems in corporate governance, but the accounting on the whole has been sound.
Now, really quickly, one thing that you do to make sure you've got good corporate governance and you're not getting crooks on the boards of your companies?
Well, what you do is you have to get to know these people so you understand their incentives, their motivation, their attitudes. Are they really trying to build a proper company? If you find that, then you're probably going to make a good investment.
All right.
Just like anywhere else.
Exactly. All right. Mattias Westman of Prosperity Capital, really glad you could join us.